This episode is made possible by our Patreon supporters: Monique Tuttle, Julie Gray, Bree Smith, Robin Brown, Janelise Cannon, Jamie Lang, Jill Harrigan, Maria Carla Sanchez, Heather McKinnon, Chantel Oliver, Valerie Jacobson, Lindsay Cummings, and Michaela Frew. Hi, Katie.
Hi, Olivia.
It is the 12th century BCE.
Oh.
The Assyrian army has set its sights on Palestine. And when the Assyrian army decides to take over somewhere, they generally do. But standing in their way is the city of Bethulia. And the Assyrians are set to just wipe it off the map on their way to glorious victory. When the people of the city come to a powerful, wealthy widow named Judith and ask her to please intervene.
Okay.
The TLDR version of this story is she boldly strolls into the enemy army camp, announces that she has information to sell, makes friends with the key officers, and within a few days finds herself in the tent of
General
a
Holofernes.
very drunken Holofernes. But instead of selling him information, of course, she cuts his head off.
Yes.
Slides it into a bag, takes the head back to her hometown, where it is prominently displayed. And this, of course, is a devastating blow which completely destroys morale in the Assyrian army. They change their mind, retreat, and Palestine remains unconquered.
For a minute.
For a hot second. A glorious story.
Oh, yeah.
Judith, a glorious heroine.
Wonderful.
Not the woman we're talking about today.
Okay.
In fact, we're not talking about this time or place at all. But we are talking about a woman who painted my personal favorite image of this scene.
Oh, that is literally what I was picturing. As you were telling the story, you could see
by far the best one.
Oh, yes. It is by far the best one. It is.
But then the question becomes, which one of her many paintings of this scene are you thinking about? Because I've already had the experience, preparing this episode, of twice saying to someone, oh, her Judith and Holofernes is my favorite. And they say, oh, yes, me too. And then start describing a different painting than the one that I was thinking of.
Oh, why did she paint it so much?
That is the question. One that we will talk about a lot in this episode. What's her name?
Artemisia
Gentileschi.
What a name.
An amazing name.
Is that a real name or is that her, adopted
It is her real name. She's Italian, so there's...
Artemisia Gentileschi.
Yeah.
Like that?
Yeah, just like that. I'm pretty sure that's exactly how they spoke in the 17th century.
I hope all our listeners in Italy were deeply impressed.
Yeah, they were deeply something. I'm super excited to be able to talk about one of my favorite artists today. So let's dive right in. I'm Olivia Mickle.
And I'm Katie Nelson.
And this is What's Her Name?
Fascinating women you've never heard of.
My guest today is the wonderful Lindsay Huss.
My name is Lindsay Huss. I am an artist working in Ogden, Utah. I am a forever art nerd, but I was an art educator for 10 years of my life. But I have been doing art full-time for the last 5 years. And I still love to geek out on amazing artists such as this incredible one.
Artist, art educator, visual storyteller, an award-winning muralist, and an even more passionate fan of Artemisia Gentileschi than me.
I first met Artemisia Gentileschi after obsessing over the famous Baroque artist Caravaggio. He is the one that everyone thinks of. Unfortunately, no one first thinks of Artemisia. So in my college classes, I did learn about Caravaggio, became obsessed with tenebrism. I love the really dark shadows, the really bright lights, almost a spotlight on figures. I just found it really impactful, really dynamic, and I wanted to start putting that into my own work. And as I was researching Caravaggio, I came across this short list of some of his most famous followers, and I saw Artemisia's name on her, and I was like, oh, I think maybe she was mentioned in one of my art history classes at some point, but I don't know enough about her. And so I started reading about her, looking at her works, and was just blown away by her skill and her incredible use of light, drama, and so much emotion in her work, which was something I really wanted to capture. So I started looking at her works and started incorporating that idea into some of my own. When I became very well acquainted and even more obsessed with her was when I was actually teaching an art history course in my high school classroom through a local university. And I noticed that the generation of children that I was teaching was incredibly inspired by her. Seeing this woman who went through a lot but stood up for herself, number one, painted all of the things that she wanted to paint, number two, and then living a life that she wanted to lead as a woman in the 1600s. Seeing that passion for her story from my students was something that really lit a fire in me and just, kind of stoked that flame of passion for her. So I'd fallen in love with her, but I fell in love with her even more deeply because of the kids I was teaching.
So let's start with that paintings of Judith and Holofernes. All the paintings we're talking about in this episode will be on our website, of course. But it is a good question. Why does she keep painting the same things over and over? It's not just this one. There's a few scenes that seem to keep coming up. And that is a common thing among fine artists. Many of my favorite Pre-Raphaelite artists did the exact same story over and over and over again in a bunch of different ways. And it's one of my favorite things is to be able to compare them and see, how are they thinking about this now? And how do they think about this 30 years later? So it gives us a lot of fascinating insights into how she's working as an artist and also maybe why she's working. But who is Artemisia Gentileschi?
So Artemisia was working during the Baroque time period. Right before this, we had the Renaissance era, which I think most people are familiar with. It's what a lot of people consider the pinnacle of Western art. And that time period was 1350 through 1620. And it was very, very influential, especially in Italy. That's where it began. And sort of bled into the Baroque period a bit. It inspired it. There was this movement toward drama and dynamism within painting, especially allegorical painting. I mean, allegorical painting has always been dramatic. Biblical stories are, of course, dramatic. But in the Baroque period, I feel like we see it reaching a new level of drama.
Very dramatic lighting, very dramatic subjects, action, and she is...
I still marvel at the way that they managed to paint light in this style. Chiaroscuro. It's like mind-blowing. It'll be the most dramatic lighting ever, with one bright source of light and everything else is in pitch darkness, and somehow you can still see everything, even though they painted it all in like these deep black colors. I still don't understand. It's magic.
And the fabrics in Baroque painting are... I mean, this is kind of their flex, right? The fabrics are their flex of, look how good I am at this.
Look at this silk, which is draped.
Yes. In the most perfectly iridescent, capturing every nuance of the light. So Caravaggio is the artist to beat at this time and the artist to imitate. And there is a huge slew of artists who are taking what he's done and running with it. Artemisia's father is one of those. He is a Caravaggio. And Artemisia starts painting alongside of her father very, very young.
She was born on July 8th in 1593 in Rome. She was one of 5 children. Her father was an artist, a painter. But Artemisia, the only girl born in her family, was the child that showed the most promise to be an artist. And so her father did take her on as an apprentice and taught her how to paint.
She is a child prodigy for sure. And by 17 years old, she produces this work called Susanna and the Elders, another biblical theme that is indistinguishable from the work of all the most famous painters of her day, I would say, in level of quality.
In 1610, she painted Susanna and the Elders from the book of Daniel, which is a pretty pivotal story in the Bible for Artemisia. Susanna and the Elders is something that she painted when she was only 17 years old, which is absolutely incredible to me. And it was actually attributed to her father for a long time. So I really like that she got that recognition eventually. Susanna is a noble woman. She is bathing in her garden, and some lecherous old men see her in the garden, unclothed, and they are so filled with lust that they tell her that if she does not come participate in bodily delight with them, they are going to say that she has been adulterous with another man. She refuses, she holds to her morals, and these men do accuse her of adultery, and she's arrested and is going to be put to death. Daniel comes to her rescue at this trial and says, hey, we should take a second and ask these men separately what they were doing in her garden and what they actually saw. And they were like, oh, maybe that's a great idea to ask more questions before we murder some noble woman. They question the elders. And of course, their stories don't match. And it becomes very clear that Susanna was telling the truth the entire time. And she is allowed to go free. And these men are put to death. So we can see that Artemisia is already very into these biblical stories of women who overcome difficulties and obstacles put in their way by men.
When this painting is exhibited, her very proud father basically says, you have surpassed what I can teach you. At 17, I'm no help to you anymore. You need to go study with a better artist.
This happens in 1610. So he decided to have her go apprentice with another artist. Artemisia was sent to work with her father's friend and a fellow artist, Agostino Tassi.
And now comes the horrible part.
And unfortunately, there is a life event for Artemisia that I feel overshadows a lot of the other amazing things that happen in her life. But it's pivotal to her and her work, and I think it gives it another element of power.
Agostino Tassi rapes Artemisia, and when she tells her father what has happened, her father responds in a way that is typical of the time.
His solution was he went to Tassi and said, you have defiled my daughter, and now I expect you to marry her.
Because that's what you do.
Yeah.
This is more than anything a property crime. He has devalued Artemisia's...
You break it, you buy it.
Yes.
Type of situation.
Yes.
I think that alone for a lot of people, knowing that in that time, the expectation was to marry a rapist, I think that fires a lot of people up and really creates this empathy for her, completely warranted. I can't even fathom what it would feel like to be asked to marry someone that had assaulted me. Unfortunately, Tossi, still not a great man, and decided that he wasn't going to marry her. He refused.
Artemisia's father, Orazio, presses charges against Tossi, insisting that Tossi either marry her or pay her dowry.
Interesting.
So again, property crime. It's going to be really hard to marry her off now.
Yeah.
So you have to pay a big dowry so that we can get her married off.
And when they went to trial, it was revealed that he had actually murdered his wife and he had committed all of these other crimes against other people. So it just became very clear that he was not a very wholesome character.
Wow.
And I think another part of the trial that a lot of people were very taken by is that she was only believed because she was tortured. She held her story even while undergoing torture with thumb screws. She just endured all kinds of hells in order to be believed. And, she's a teenager. I can't really imagine going through all of this as a teenager. I think of what I was like when I was 17 or 18, and oh my goodness. I think that's something that a lot of people really, they hear that and I think it just makes them boil over a little bit. Yeah, I think a lot of women connect with her, unfortunately, in that way.
He is convicted of raping Artemisia and sentenced to 2 years in jail and to be exiled from Rome.
That's not nothing.
Unfortunately, of course, within 8 months he is out of jail and he is never actually made to leave Rome.
Also not surprising.
And I think that story of abuse and then turning it into something that really motivated her throughout her life. I think it's too bad when it even has to be part of the conversation. But I think it's really nice for people who have been through a horrific event to have someone who made their life better because of it. Especially during the Me Too movement, I feel like we saw a lot more of her work popping up on social media and kind of hitting the mainstream a little bit more. So, yeah, I think she is very pivotal to what's happening currently, even though she's been dead for centuries. So after this trial, her father does find someone for her to marry. So she's married to this Florentine painter in 1616, and she moves to Florence. So she is finally able to leave this town with this menace still there.
And as a married woman, she continues working, she continues painting, and she is recognized and successful as one of the top painters in Florence, in Naples, in Venice. In fact, she's so well known that in 1638, she is brought to London to become a court painter for Charles I.
Yeah, I think we tend to think like that the Victorian patterns we inherited go all the way back into the past, but they really don't, especially the 17th century.
Mm-hmm.
Like, their gender roles and the level of patriarchy in the 17th century is way closer to our modern day, I think.
Yeah.
But we tend to assume that it's all the same. But there was a century
women
there
have never
where,
been allowed. Yeah.
Yeah. Women had a chance there for a good century.
Yeah, and she's well connected. Her father is well known and respected. Her husband is well known and respected.
In 1616, she was accepted to the Academy of Fine Art.
In Florence?
The Academy of the Arts of Drawing in Florence.
Wow.
She was the first woman ever accepted into that academy, which was founded in, I think it was 1558 by Cosimo I Medici. So she was well entrenched with the Medici family. They really loved her work, and the Duke was very, very excited about her painting. And she was kind of one of those patrons and sponsors that helped get her into this academy. She deserved to be there. She rocked it. She earned that spot, and she ran with it.
She becomes friends with Galileo.
I was just thinking 1616 is the year he's called before the Inquisition.
Yeah, she is firmly in the middle of all the most famous people, these brilliant, super impactful artists and thinkers and philosophers and scientists.
That's funny how to convey a woman's significance and importance in the past when centuries in the future, and I guess I keep coming back to like the metaphor of Taylor Swift. Like you could say Taylor Swift, she's in the middle of all, like she knows all the famous people. She is friends with everybody. And it's like, okay, so yeah, she's a big deal. But that's sort of offensive even to try
Galileo was friends with her.
Yeah, exactly. Like she's Artemisia Gentileschi. Didn't somebody once write that human history is a mine of truths that we can return to again and again?
Somebody did. I wonder who that was. Huh.
She does go on to have 5 children, but only her daughter Prudentia survived until adulthood, which of course was common in that time, but there are records of how that affected her.
This marriage doesn't seem to have been a super happy one. She was openly having an affair with a famous poet and very influential patron, and that seemed to be fine with her husband.
It's also interesting because there are some letters between her and her lover when she lived in Florence, and her husband, Pietro, knew about this lover.
She would write these romantic love letters, and then her husband would write friendly little notes on the back. Hey man, how's it going?
Huh.
So they all knew each other, and Pietro was fine with it. And this person that she was having this love affair with was a big supporter of the art. So it seems like she and her painter husband were totally okay having this man in their lives.
So that was okay, apparently. But he would also become incredibly jealous and sometimes even violent toward other men that he believed she was having an affair with. And eventually he abandoned her and their daughter, which was probably actually much better for her, but it did leave her having to support herself financially completely on her own. She is now a single woman with an enormous amount of autonomy. She moves to Venice, where she's getting commissions from people like the King of Spain. But when she is 37 years old, the Black Death arrives in Venice and eventually kills more than a third of the population of the city.
Ooh!
So Artemisia decides to move to Naples. And it is in Naples where she finally gets her first major church altarpiece commission.
Okay.
She's one of the most famous artists in Europe, but apparently certain realms of art are still pretty close to her. This is the 17th century. Yes, women are doing stuff. And it is still really, really hard for a woman to be taken as seriously as a man. And she complains often about having to constantly defend her work and her career. She's so proud of her ability to support herself and to run her own workshop. She is the only woman artist doing that in Italy at this time. But she's extremely annoyed by the misogyny she constantly faces. And she does feel it has a serious impact on the options she has in her career. So, I guess, as you say, very similar to being a woman in the Western world today. But she knew who she was. She knew what she deserved. And she wasn't going to sit back and let these men dismiss her or mistreat her. Once, when a very rich and powerful and influential patron tried to stiff her on the bill, she wrote him a letter and said, "I will show your most illustrious lordship what a woman can do. I think your lordship will find the spirit of Caesar in this soul of a woman."
Wow.
She she was able to do kind of whatever she wanted within the constraints of society, of course.
And what she wants is to paint with her daughter, who has also become a painter. She's trained her.
We don't really have much information about Prudentia, but we do know that she had talent. And they traveled together, take on jobs as well. And eventually she moved to London in 1638.
Dang.
So Orazio has been working at the English court for 12 years, and King Charles and Henrietta Maria are very adamant that they really want Artemisia to come to England and to be a member of their court.
Wow.
And she does not want to go. She is not interested in leaving Italy. But Charles and Henrietta will not let it go. They keep pestering her for years. They even send her brother over to persuade her to come. He's been assisting their father in London. And finally, after 4 years, she gives in and is immediately swallowed up into the social whirl that is the court of Charles and Henrietta Maria. She creates several of her most famous works of art while she is in London. Her art hangs all over the palace. But also Orazio has been commissioned to create a grand allegorical ceiling for Henrietta Maria's new palace, her House of Delights. And presumably Artemisia is also working on that. Theo is getting older. In fact, he'll die within a year of Artemisia arriving. And a lot of art historians say that Henrietta Maria would definitely have wanted the most famous female painter in Europe to work on this very female space that she's creating in her new modern palace. So we don't know for sure, but certain figures in the ceiling look very much like her work and are generally assumed to be her work. And she was absolutely celebrated and beloved in London. She is the center of this court. This would be many artists' dream job, but she really doesn't seem to have liked it. She only stayed 2 years and then noped off back to Italy, which, given that whole beheading the king thing that is about to go down within a few years, probably good timing.
I bet she meant Margaret Cavendish.
Yeah, I'm sure she did. She was very enmeshed in the court and very sort of a celebrated central figure.
Yeah, for sure.
I'm sure she would have fit right in with Margaret Cavendish. She also was a bit of a weirdo in terms of kind of her self-expression. And I see a similar thing, Margaret Cavendish is doing these amazing, bizarre cosplay costume outfits, and Gentileschi is doing the same thing in paintings, right? It is a very common thing for you to do a self-portrait as a character at this time period, but she has access to a much broader variety of options for that, because this is also the height of the allegorical portrait, right? You're going to paint the spirit of creativity, and you're going to paint these ideas as personified individuals that are always women. She can paint herself as the spirit of painting.
Brilliant.
And she does. And it's wonderful. It's an odd, personal feeling, identifiable portrait. But she's also doing a lot of very subversive, very unusual things with these portraits. Artemisia's women are strong. They are dynamic. They are powerful.
If you look at her self-portrait, she's not a tiny woman. She's not this dainty, delicate woman. And she painted women that looked like her. Comparing her work to Caravaggio especially, we have these like willowy, submissive, docile appearing women. And then you have the women in Artemisia's who are like bulky And you can tell they're strong and they are not going to back down. They have this fire about them that I think is just, it's amazing. They look like heroine. She paints every woman like they're a heroine, which they are.
It completely changes the tone and I think the message of a lot of these subjects that are very popular. Everybody's painting Judith and Holofernes, but no one is painting it the way she is painting it.
Oh, so good. I think this is the one that's been seen within the last few years. It is maybe the most energetic. And she didn't just paint this one time. There are multiple versions of Judith playing Holofernes. I don't know if I have a favorite. I just love all of them for different reasons. I just love, it's 1623. It's Judith and her maidservant. And her maidservant is putting Holofernes' head in a bag to be removed from the scene. And Judith is holding this sword and blocking the light from the candle so that, it's like they heard something. And I just love that moment as well because it's like these two powerful women putting this decapitated head in a bag. It's just, and the drama of the lighting. Judith has this shadow across her face. You almost can't even see her expression, but she doesn't look afraid. She still looks powerful. And she still looks beautiful. Her dress still has all of this amazing light on it. It's like she painted the fabric so beautifully. It's just so tactile in the way that she did it. So I love that one. I just love how excited she was about her work. And I just feel like it shows. There's so much energy in her paintings, and it just, I get goosebumps thinking about it. I also love the one of Judith and her servant where they're just like casually leaving the camp. She's got the sword slung over her shoulder, and her servant is carrying Holofernes' head in the basket. It just, the picture of calm. A lot of her murderous characters have this kind of like cool, calm, they look like assassins, basically.
My favorite of Gentileschi's Judith and Holofernes is, I think, the most well-known one. She's wearing a yellow dress, and she has her servant woman holding him down.
Yeah.
There are two very similar versions of this. She does a version in 1612.
There's the one
where
the one with
Judith
the
is
blue
wearing
dress.
a blue dress, right? And there's one in 1620 with the yellow dress. The composition is almost exactly the same.
Yeah, they are. Yeah, interesting. The lighting is way different. Yeah.
Yeah, the details, the mastery of the really dramatic lighting, the facial expressions, the fabrics.
Yeah, the light reflecting off of the gold dress.
Gruesome and glorious. And I think that's how Artemisia presents it in this painting. It is gruesome and glorious. And if we compare her to Caravaggio, because she was his follower, I think it's very fair, and I think it's an accurate way to see how she saw women versus how men saw women in this time period. So if we look at Caravaggio's version of Judith playing Holofernes, it is this very, thin woman, and she has this disgusted look on her face, and she's almost pulling away. This offends sensibilities.
And frankly, you could never cut someone's head off with the lack of force that she is putting into this process.
Yeah, it's so dainty. It takes a lot of force to decapitate a human.
All of Artemisia's are not that. She is fully leaning into this act. The feel of it is so different. She is cutting off this man's head, and she is not second-guessing herself.
She's getting to work.
Yeah. These women are just doing the job.
And so to see Artemisia come in and say, no, I'm going to paint a woman the way that she had to have acted in this moment, I think it seems so out of place looking at that painting compared to the male counterparts who also depicted that particular story. It really is kind of one of those little peeks into the past and a woman saying, that doesn't work here. And I just love that about her.
So it's interesting that she's coming back to this subject again. Yeah. So it could be that she just is doing that thing many artists do where they go, oh, I could have done better. Let's do it again.
Yeah.
But also, and I hate that we have to talk about it because it shouldn't be the story of her life. It does seem like the theme of male violence toward women becomes a very important thematic element in her work. And the way she addresses it, this very unusual and very direct and very confrontational and I would say very respectful way of depicting these women who are fighting for their lives or their people is so wildly different than what the prominent men around her are doing. I've a couple of times have seen when people are talking about Artemisia Gentileschi and someone says, wait, which one is that? Seen someone describe her as, the woman that does all of the biblical women murdering men. And they go, oh, right, yeah. She does several, Susanna and the Elders. Now, she's painted this at 17 before the attack happens.
So she's already on theme.
Right, she's already aware of...
Yeah, I see in her a pattern that returns in Christian traditions of women coming along and saying, hey, there are women in the Bible. Let's talk about them. And maybe Gentileschi is even like, let's normalize female violence against men. We've normalized male violence against women. Let's normalize also that women can do it back or something like that.
And I was thinking like that's perhaps a useful thing to remind some men of in this time and place that, hey, there is precedent for if you push women too far, we will cut your head off.
Yeah.
And we will drive a spike through your ear and we will be remembered as heroes for doing that. Yeah.
She's wielding women's history. She's absolutely saying, well, hold on here. Let's look a bit closer. Let's visualize them in such a vivid way you'll never forget.
And make them feasible. Gentileschi's women are frightening. You don't want to cross Gentileschi's Judith. You don't even want to cross Gentileschi's Judith's servant who's smuggling the head out in the bag. These women are a reasonable threat to the established order of things that might actually make you think through the patterns that we're seeing.
Yeah. Yeah. And the emotions she conveys in their just staid expressions, they're not traumatized by this. They're not doing something that's radically out of character. They're just like taking care of this.
She has a Cleopatra that is a fascinating comparison to the way everyone else is painting Cleopatra. She has a Lucrezia that is a fascinating comparison to the way everyone else is painting Lucrezia.
I think she's really, really amazing at putting that into her paintings, being like, this is the truth of what a woman is. We're not what you men paint us as.
That reputation can also tend to overshadow the rest of her work, which was extremely varied and really brilliant. She was also extremely well known for her portraiture. She was a highly in-demand portrait artist. But she's also doing absolutely beautiful, peaceful self-portraiture. herself as St. Catherine of Alexandria, herself as a lute player.
I like that. She can paint scenes of female violence and scenes of herself at peace.
And the consistent pattern with her self-portraits is she is always staring down the viewer in a way that is very... It feels very unusual and very challenging you.
She breaks the fourth wall.
She's challenging you to see something.
Mm-hmm.
And you can debate all day about what she's challenging you to see.
Cool.
But I would say one part of it is definitely to see her in the painting. It's Catherine of Alexandria, but it is always extremely identifiably Artemisia Gentileschi.
Cool.
She seems to just also be having fun cosplaying and painting herself, shifting the norms of what these women should look like, of what women in general should look like.
It reminds me of the self-portrait of Botticelli when he paints himself into the Medici portrait. I remember talking about this idea of painters paint themselves into a painting, looking at the viewer, looking at the painting, and it's a form of immortality. Yes. Forever, they will be there watching people admire their art, and they'll just be sitting there going like, what do you think of this, huh? Yeah, pretty good, right? I know. Yeah. Oh, you saw that corner. Yeah, that's good too, isn't it? Look at this color over here. It's like it's a form of immortality.
Maybe they imbue themselves into it where their ghost is actually, ha-ha!
With hers, that's totally what it feels like. Her personality is in it, and it's watching you watch the painting.
Absolutely.
Her self-portrait, I think, is really, really great. It's the pittura, and it's this style of painting. It's the allegorical image of creativity. Because men were painting this a lot of the time, they would use these mythological creatures or biblical women to depict this. But because Artemisia was a woman, she was like, well, why can't I be the embodiment of the pittura? So she painted herself in there instead of a symbolic figure, and I thought that was fabulous. In 1593, the pittura is described in Iconologica as a beautiful woman with dark hair, disheveled. She's a bit disheveled, of course, because this creative passion that she has in here. So, of course, you're a little disheveled when you're creating, right? It's a whirlwind. It's fire. Then, of course, the gold chain is an indicator of the skill that this painter would have. So the fine details and the look of metal to get that reflection. And the iridescent fabric for mastery of color. And when you look at Artemisia's pittura, she has all of these elements. She's slightly disheveled. Her posture is leaning, so there's this really nice angle throughout the entire painting. So there is this energy in the composition that she really emphasizes. And I think it's very true to how artists create. I myself do time-lapse videos sometimes, and it's really funny to watch because I get in some very interesting positions when I paint. So seeing Artemisia leaning, around her canvas to look at the mirror or the subject just really speaks to that. I think it's so true to what artists really experience. I love that little detail about that composition. She does this really incredible job of creating the softness and glowiness of skin, but the darkness of the surrounding and the luminosity of the gold and fabrics and things. She just gets every single bit of it. And the best part is that it's a self-portrait. It's just so fabulous that it's this portrait of this idea of what art is. She's like, oh, it's going to be me.
And as Lindsay Huss points out, it is deconstructing and destabilizing all of the established patterns of male gaziness that are supposed to be happening in Baroque painting.
Yeah, totally.
That, especially, I would say, at this chunk of Baroque painting, the main point of women existing on a canvas is their to-be-looked-at-ness, right? As Laura Mulvey, who first proposed the idea of the male gaze, that these women exist as objects that are valuable for their to-be-looked-at-ness.
I just am so blown away by all of the women in her paintings. The women are still beautiful. They don't have the doe-eyed softness of other paintings of the time. In so many of the paintings around her, it was women simply painted to be beautiful. That was the whole purpose, for them to be beautiful.
And it's not just that they're beautiful or that they are sexually appealing. It's that exchange of us enjoying ourselves looking at them. And we still see it today in tons of movies, especially this scopophilia. You can notice it when you are told to watch someone watching someone and enjoy watching a man look at a woman. We're not just looking at her, we're watching a man look at her, and we're watching her. And you see all these double layers. Of course, all of the famous paintings of beautiful nude women looking in a mirror.
Yeah.
And it's always titled Vanity.
Yeah.
Yes, she's vain for wanting to look at herself. This painter didn't just spend 8 months of his life painting a painting of her naked so we can look at her naked. That's not the problem at all. She's vain. It's a very odd construct. And that is a very strong theme through a lot of Baroque art.
But then hers, there's so much power in that beauty. And in the others, a lot of times it feels like the beauty strips away the power of that woman. And I love that she can maintain both and celebrate both. I just find it really exciting.
It's not the same. And it's sometimes hard to explain how it's not the same until you put them side by side. And then it becomes obvious. Look at a man's painting of Cleopatra on her deathbed and Gentileschi's portrait of Cleopatra on her deathbed, and you suddenly understand. Oh, when we look at Gentileschi's Cleopatra, we are seeing a powerful, important cultural figure. We're seeing this powerful, complicated queen and reflecting on her rule and her death and the story. And she's naked, but that's a side note to what's happening. Whereas in the vast majority of paintings of Cleopatra, we're looking at a naked lady who has been orientalized enough to make it more exciting. It reminds me so much of Edmonia Lewis's statue of Cleopatra that is so different. As you said, they're reclaiming women's history. They're putting the women back in women's history. They're putting actual women and saying, we know you don't like thinking about this, but she was in fact a real human being. And you're going to have to wrestle with that fact. She wasn't just an idealized, sexualized fantasy. She was a real human being. And if that upsets you, maybe you should think about why. It's fascinating and still incredibly beautiful. It's not like she's saying women shouldn't be beautiful. These women are beautiful. But looking at their bodies is not the point of the pictures.
In 1640, after working in the court for a while, she moved back to Naples, which is where she passed away.
We don't know exactly when she died or how she died. Her last known dated work is 1652. And we know that the last time she paid her taxes was in 1654. She may have died in the plague in Naples in 1656, which killed half the population of the city, 200,000 people. And over 1 million people in the Kingdom of Naples. Ooh.
She led her own life, even though she went through this horrific experience as a teenager. She was living the life that she wanted to lead, and she's just one of the most powerful painters we have. She's a baddie.
There is still so much more to be uncovered about her life, and it seems like this is Artemisia's moment. And her story does seem perfectly primed for pulling out of the well at this particular moment. And I am very excited to see what else we're going to find as more people start looking for her.
I think it's good for humanity to remember that we are still connected to the people of the past. It makes me feel empowered to tell my own story through my artwork, even though we're centuries apart. I feel close kinship with her.
Huge thanks to Lindsay Huss. On our website at What'sHerNamePodcast.com, you can find all kinds of images, resources, links, and more.
You can also follow us on Instagram, Twitter, and Facebook, where we post lots of photos